This is a very special experience for me and hopefully for my family. When I was young, my father introduced us to a wonderful Christmas story called The Anniversary. And it became a family tradition in my home that my father would read this story every year to the entire family at Christmas. When we just started our family, when Gail and I started our family, we decided that we would continue that tradition. And so for the last many years, we have shared this story with our children each Christmas. It's called The Anniversary, and we're capturing it on video and audio so that my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can also have the opportunity to hear this wonderful story. So, here we go. The little boy sat quite alone on the hilltop, his shepherd's crook across his knees, his small square lunch basket beside him. He made an odd, distorted shadow in the white light of the moon, for even the fringed shawl that his mother had woven of lamb's wool could not hide the ugly hump that lay. A burden much too heavy for so young a lad to bear between his shoulders. Far below him, dotting the hillside with the other irregular shadows, were the sheep. The majority of them slept, but a few wandered aimlessly up and down the slope. The boy, however, was not watching the flock. His head was thrown back, and his wide eyes were fixed on the sky. Perhaps it will happen again, he was thinking. Perhaps, though a third of a century had gone by, perhaps I shall see the great star and hear the angel voices as my father did. The moon, riding high in the heavens, went under a dark blanket of cloud. For a moment, the world was dark. The little boy sighed and lowered his eyes. It is an omen, he breathed, an omen. Though it is the time of anniversary, there will be no star this night, neither will the angels sing. The time of anniversary. How often the boy had listened to the story of the miracle that had taken place so long ago. The little boy's father had been a lad himself then. He had been the youngest of the shepherds on that glorious occasion when an angel anthem sounded across the world and a star shone above the tranquil town of Bethlehem. The little boy's father had followed the star. With the other shepherds, he had come to the stable of the inn. Crowding through the narrow doorway, he had seen a woman. With a baby in her arms. But the boy's father had told the story so many times that his family and neighbors knew it word for word. She was no ordinary woman. There was something in her face that made one think of a lighted candle, and there was in her smile a tenderness that the very cattle felt, for they drew close to her and seemed to kneel. It was not her beauty, although beauty she did possess. It was a shine from within. And the baby, the boy always prompted his father here, what of the baby? The father's hand touched his small son's shoulder at this point, touched it, and drew it away. The baby, he said, was as unlike other infants as his mother was different from other women. Scarce an hour old when I glimpsed him, there was a sense of wisdom. No, do not laugh. A sense of wisdom on his brow, and his tiny upcurled hands, indeed, seemed to have power. I found myself kneeling even as the cattle knelt, and there was the damp of tears upon my face, and though I was a lad tall for my age, I was not ashamed. Alone on the hillside, the boy could almost hear the sound of his father's voice in the stillness. His father's voice telling the story of the marvelous infant and of the wise men who had come to the stable, following also in the path of the star. They had come bearing gifts, the fame of which had traveled throughout all the land. Often the boy had heard of the gold and frankincense and myrrh. He had shivered at the tale of a great but cruel king who had ordered death to all male infants. He had thrilled to the saga of a worried young mother with her sober husband who had stolen away into the land of Egypt with her child. Many of us thought, the boy's father finished, that the child had been captured and slain by Herod, until a decade passed and we heard rumors of a youth who bore his name and who lectured in a temple at Jerusalem to a group of learned doctors. A few years ago, he heard that this same youth, grown older, had organized a band of men, that with them he was journeying from place to place, preaching and teaching, aiding the needy. And here the boy's father had a habit of lowering his voice and glancing furtively around the room. There are some who say that he has become a Messiah. And he does more than champion the cause of the common people. There are some who say that he performs wonderful deeds, healing the sick and the blind and the lepers, even raising the dead. Once at this point, the little boy interrupted, "I would that I might see him. I would that he might take the hump from my back and make me strong and straight like other children." It was growing cold on the hillside. The child drew the shawl closer about his tired body and wished that he were not a shepherd. Shepherds led a lonely life. They did not fit into the bright places of the world. Rooms gaily lighted at eventide were for the men and boys who worked hard by day and earned their moments of ease. They were not for shepherds. But what else could a crippled lad do to justify his existence? What else than tend sheep? A crippled lad who could not undertake physical labor and who had no talents. Yawning wearily, the boy glanced at the sky. From the position of the moon, he judged it to be middle night. It was still a long time before sunrise, still hours before someone would come to take his place, and he could limp home. And yet, middle night had its compensations, for at that time he could break his fast and partake of the lunch that his mother had packed so neatly into a basket. As he reached for the basket and opened it slowly, the boy was wondering what had been prepared for his refreshment. He found, to his satisfaction, that there was a flask of goat's milk and a nearly half a loaf of crusty dark bread and some yellow cheese, and there were dried figs, sugary with their own sweetness, and wrapped separately. He came upon a real treat, a cake. Made with eggs and sifted flour, with citron in it and raisins. He had expected the bread and the cheese and the milk, even the figs he had expected, but the cake was a surprise. The sort of surprise that happens seldom. His eyes gleamed as he surveyed it, and some of the sadness went out of them. Carefully he set the basket down and spread on the ground beside him, beside the square linen in which his mother had folded the lunch. Carefully he laid out the flask of milk, the bread, the cheese, but not the cake, which he left tucked away in the depths of the basket. He left it there so that he would not be tempted to eat it first. "It is good to be hungry," he said aloud. "Yes, and to have food." From somewhere just behind him a voice spoke. It was not a loud voice, and that the music of it seemed to carry beyond the hillside. "Indeed, yes," said the voice. "It is good to be hungry and to have food and to..." Startled, for he thought he was quite alone with his thoughts and the drowsing sheep, the boy glanced back over his crooked shoulder. He saw a man standing upon the brow of the hill, silhouetted against the night sky. Ordinarily, he would have known fear, for there were cruel robbers abroad often at middle night. But somehow, the sight of this man, who was tall and muscular, failed to frighten him. He did not know why. He instinctively completed the man's unfinished sentence. "And to share it, you are a stranger here, sir." The man came closer to the child and still looking down. The man came closer to the child and stood looking down upon him. "No, not a stranger. Never a stranger. As it happens, my journey started not far from this very place. Started years before you, my lad, saw the light of day. I am by way of completing a circle." Although he couldn't imagine what the man meant, the little boy made swift response. "I was about to eat my lunch. One grows ravenous on the hillside. I am a shepherd, sir. I tend my father's flock. And each night my mother packs for me a simple repast. Will you be seated? You who have journeyed long and break bread with me? Perhaps you will talk with me as we eat. It grows lonely and dark on the hillside. I pine at times for companionship." The man continued to peer down from his impressive height. His eyes held a warm glow. It was as if a candle burned somewhere behind them, and the boy remembered the words that his father had spoken when he described the woman in a stable. He felt so comforted by the man's glance that he smiled up into the kindly face, and the man spoke again. "It is a strange coincidence, the fact that you are a shepherd, for I also tend my father's flock. And I also have often grown lonely, waiting for the gates of dawn to open. Are you sure," and he seated himself upon the ground, "that you have sufficient nourishment for two? I should not like to deprive you of anything." Gazing fascinatedly into the man's face, the boy replied, "But yes, I have a large flask of goat milk, and a yellow cheese, and nearly a loaf of bread, and 10 figs, and that's a great plenty." He did not mention the cake. Still wrapped in excuse me. He did not mention the cake, still wrapped in the basket, for a cake made of sifted flour and eggs and citron and raisins, was a rare delicacy, and it was not a very big cake. The man bent forward to tie the thong of his sandal. The boy saw that the sandal was covered with dust. He tried to keep his eyes from glancing toward his lunch basket as he tore the crusty dark bread into fragments. "Perhaps your feet are aching," he ventured as he placed the fragments in the center of the linen cloth. "This hill is hard to climb. I am close to being spent when I reach the summit of it, but I must needs sit high so that I can watch all the sheep." The man said slowly, "I have climbed steeper hills than this one, my lad, and know that there are steeper hills to be. My feet do not ache. How long," and he abruptly changed the subject, "have you been crippled?" Had it come from an ordinary person, the little boy would have resented such a display of curiosity. But from this man, the question seemed a natural one, to be answered naturally. Why, I have never been without a hump between my shoulders. I hate it. But what must be, must be. Still, it is hard to go through life looking like one of the camels that the wise men rode when they came from the east with their caravans. What, lad, do you know about the wise men from the east? How does it happen that you should mention them to me on this night? It is, and he bit into a piece of crusty dark bread, very curious. Laughing softly, the little boy answered, I suppose the wise men are on my mind because this is the time of anniversary. And I've been thinking of the baby that was born in a stable. I was hoping before you arrived that once again the great star might shine, that the angels might sing. I have in fact been watching the sky rather than my sheep. What do you know about these holy things? About the star and the song? You are so young. And the boy explained, all Bethlehem heard about the star and about the infant who lay in the manger because there was no room in the inn. I know perhaps more than others, for my father, a child himself, was one of the shepherds who saw the light from heaven and heard the angels' music. Will you, the little boy had taken the flask of goat's milk into his hands. Will you share with me this cup, sir? Perhaps you thirst. The man took the flask of milk from the fragile hands. His fingers were powerful and sinewy, but as gentle as a woman's. And he said, I will share this cup with you, for I do thirst. As he watched the man drinking deeply, the little boy thought, it must be tiring to tramp from place to place. And then he said on an impulse, will you tell me, sir, some of the towns in which you have stayed? One town is like another, my lad, with poverty and pain rubbing elbows against wealth, with greed taking toll all too often of humanity, with health on one side and illness on the other, with so few gracious deeds that one can do to help the sore distressed, and a lifetime in which to do them so desperately short. Sometimes when I was a tot, I hoped that my life might be short, but already I'm 10 years old. How old, sir, are you? I feel older than my years. I am more than 3 times your age, lad. But I too feel older than my years. You shouldn't, because you're so strong. When is your birth, sir? I was born in the spring. The man smiled his beautiful, luminous smile. It's odd that you should ask, dear lad. For this is the day of my birth. You, quite unknowing, are giving me an anniversary feast, and never has a feast been more welcome. I was weary and forlorn when I came upon you. Weary and forlorn, as he stared at the man, the little boy queried. Haven't you any people of your own, people with whom you can make merry on your day of birth? When my birthday arrives, Mother prepares a real feast for me and gives me gifts. This shawl I wear, she wove for my last birthday. This year, she pressed a sheaf of bright flowers into wax. Once, when I was smaller, she made wondrous sweet meats with honey and grain. The man reached over and rested his hand on the little boy's knee. I fear that I have grown too old and large for birthday gifts. Furthermore, my loved ones aren't near enough just now to make merry with me. But maybe, who knows, there will be a gift for me at my journey's end. The little boy's knee felt all a tingle under the pressure of the friendly hand. "When, sir, will you come to the end of your journey?" The man did not meet the child's gaze. He replied, "Perhaps very soon." The little boy was worried. He said, "You don't look happy about it. Don't you want to come to the end of your travels? Don't you want to reach home and see what gift they have in store for you?" "Yes, I want to reach home, but the gift..." "It may be too beautiful to bear or too heavy for me to carry. I suppose I should be getting on. You have made this birthday very sweet, my lad." Peeping down at the white cloth with its remnants of bread and cheese, the little boy thought, "There seems to be as much food as ever." He couldn't have liked it. And suddenly he was swept by a burning sense of shame. He spoke impetuously, one word tumbling over the other. "You did not enjoy your food, and you have had no true birthday feast. That, though you have no way of guessing, is because I have been selfish and mean. I have a cake in my basket, a cake that I was saving to eat alone after you left me. It is a cake of sifted flour and eggs and citron and raisins, and I love cake. But now I would not enjoy it if I ate it in a solitary fashion. It would choke me, sir. I desire to give the cake to you as my gift. Perhaps you will munch it later when the chill of early morn has set in and you are on the road." The man did not speak, but his eyes were like stars instead of candles, as he watched his small host lift the cake from the basket and display its rich goodness. It was only when the little boy extended it toward him that he broke into speech. "Ah, my lad, you have sustained me with your bread, and we have drunk deep of the same cup. So now we will share this cake, which shall be, through your bounty, my birthday cake. We will apportion it evenly and deftly, and we will eat of it together, you and I. And then I shall wait for the dawn, and I will be on my way. But as I walk along the road, I shall see a little lad's face, and shall hear a little lad's voice, and shall remember a little lad's generosity." Gravely, as though he were handling something infinitely precious, the man took the rich cake into his fingers. Carefully he divided it so that the two sections were equal. Then he said, Bless unto us this food, my father." The boy was startled, because there was no one else on the hillside. Then he said, This cake is the cake of life, lad. Enjoy it to the last crumb." So the man and the little boy ate the cake together, and he thought that he had never tasted such fare. It was as if the cake's richness were verily the richness of life. As he licked the last crumbs from his fingers, and he felt that he was gathering force and vigor and purpose. In his mind's eye, for no reason at all, he saw a picture of himself, robust and handsome and brave, striding down the road with his weakness cast from him and his chin high. "It is like a vision," he said. But when the man queried, "What do you mean, lad?" he hung his head and was unable to answer. Indeed, he was silent so long that the man's hand came to rest lightly upon his shoulder. Lightly, but oh so firmly. There was something in the touch that made tears hang on the little boy's lashes and wrung from him quick, vehement words. "Oh, do not leave me, sir. We could be such friends, you and I. Come with me to my home and dwell with my family. My mother will make cakes for you, and my father shall share with you of his plenty. And you may have my bed and my wax flowers, and even this fringed shawl I wear. Do not journey on, sir. Stay with me here in Bethlehem." The man spoke. His voice was like a great bell tolling over the hill and valley. "I must go on. I must be about my Father's business. I must travel toward my destiny. But I shall never leave you, my lad, for all that. For lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world." Bowing his head in his hands, covering his misted eyes, the little boy was aware of the man's firm fingers traveling up from his shoulder until they touched his hair. But now he couldn't speak, for a pulse drummed in his throat, and a strange rhythm was hammering in his ears. When he raised his head finally, the man was gone, and the hillside empty, save for the shadows that were the sheep. The little boy sobbed once, and sharply, with a sense of loss. He struggled to his feet, only he didn't have to struggle, really, for there was a curious lightness about his body, and a feeling of freshness and peace that transcended the pain of parting. But it was not until he drew the fringed lamb's wool tighter across his back that he realized how straight he was standing and how straight he would always stand.